Isn't it wild that we used to create icons of masculinity and now we don't even know what we want men to be anymore? That's the peculiar little cultural cul-de-sac that we're stuck in when we ask the question, who should be the next James Bond? James Bond might not always be your Bond, but over the years, everyone has found a Bond for them. We've had all the types: sexy, bold, heroic, brazen. But in essence, who is James Bond? Now, I'm not here to debate casting. I'm not handing out audition slips or fantasy football picks for MI6. I'm not even that interested in who should play him. I'm more interested in asking, what does Bond even represent in modern Britain? And more importantly, does Bond still matter at all? He's constantly back in the news cycle, not because of a film, but because of the search is on. They've announced the director and it's going to be with Amazon. And so the casting rumours have resurged. A new Bond really is on the horizon. But it's never just about the actor, is it? Bond returns to the spotlight every few years like clockwork, and every time it says more about us than it does him. We obsess over the potential choice of the actor: Idris Elba, Aaron Taylor Johnson, James Norton, Henry Cavill, and wasn't there someone from Bridgerton on the list for a while? Anyway, it's endless headlines and endless speculation, but we've lost the thread. We're obsessed, but with what exactly? Because this isn't just about a character anymore. It's about a cultural negotiation. A quiet, uncomfortable question about masculinity and whether we still know what we want from it. Once upon a Cold War, James Bond was more than just a suave man with a license to kill. He was British masculinity distilled. Calm under pressure, elegant but dangerous, stoic without being hollow, seductive without being sleazy. He made decisions, he held doors. He didn't need to be loud, he was present. And he wore the hell out of a tux. He was the man every man wanted to be, and the man women wanted to be with. And for me, it's Pierce Brosnan. Now, maybe that's just my personal bias showing, but there's just always something about him that feels grown up. He might not have been the most rugged or the most critically adored, but there's something about him that just feels exactly right. Polished but magnetic, composed, dangerous but never vulgar, and there was a stillness to him, a kind of graceful control. He gave you the impression that whatever chaos was coming, he'd already clocked it, weighed it up, and planned the exit route. And that kind of masculine presence, it's rare now. And I think a lot of us are starting to notice the absence. Because these days, masculinity changes like seasonal fashion. One year it's toxic to go to the gym. The next you're irrelevant unless you look like a dehydrated art student in pearl earrings. You're either a gym bro villain or a performative soft boy with trauma playlists and oat milk. And the quiet, grounded, emotionally adult man, he's vanished from the cultural radar entirely, especially if he's British. Where is the space for the emotionally complex, stoic, and softly authoritative man? The one who doesn't need to say he's safe, you just feel it. Pop culture doesn't quite know what to do with a man who's not neurotic, ironic, or in a self discovery arc in Cornwall. And the men Bond's age, the mid 30s to mid 40s, they're in a cultural limbo. They're too old for TikTok, too young to be statesmen, and not flashy enough to be trendy or not broken enough to be studied. So pop culture doesn't really know what to do with them, so it just rewrites them or waters them down entirely. And that's what's happened with modern Bond. Because in the newer films, Bond's become more emotional. That's not a bad thing in theory. It helps to balance out the Bond as killer machine. But it starts to feel like we're writing the character to appeal to women instead of respecting him for what made him appealing as a man. And I'm sure that the Bond producers would argue, but Bond is still for men. I mean, the storylines have become more violent, but the Bond girls become just as capable, just as strong, and he gets saved more often. He's now more team based. And suddenly, Bond feels less like a dangerous gentleman and more like the romantic lead in a BBC drama who works in counter-terrorism and makes risotto on the weekends. We say that we're evolving him. Sometimes it just feels like we're erasing him entirely, as if masculinity itself needed to be corrected to pass the cultural test. Because Bond was never about being perfect. It was about being unapologetically male in the way that felt steady, controlled, grounded, loyal, and quietly intense. The kind of man who doesn't flinch, who protects, who plans, who keeps the room calm even when everything's on fire. He didn't need to monologue about his pain. He didn't need to prove anything. He was just there. He didn't try to be everything, but he was just something. And Bond isn't a collection of character traits. He has an origin, a soul, and a mythology. We talk about changing the traits of legacy characters as if it's progressive. But once we rewrite the instincts and the values, the core emotional framework, are we still telling his story or just using his name? And look, I'm not saying that legacy characters can't evolve, but when we reshape every icon to reflect the moment, we're not just changing the wardrobe, we're changing the values, the structure, and the aspiration. And with Bond, we're not just confused about who should play him, we're confused about what a man even is anymore. And maybe that's why this conversation keeps circling back every few years, why it just pops up like clockwork. Because deep down, I think we miss him. Not just the talks or the girls or the gadgets, but the feeling that whatever happened, he had it under control. You were safe. The danger was real, but so was the stability. He didn't need to shout or cry or tweet to prove it. We don't need Bond frozen in the 1960s, and we don't need him rebranded for TikTok. We say we're evolving him, but it just seems like we're confused about what a man even is anymore. That it's feeling more like we're scared of men being men at all. We just need a man who reminds us what strength used to look like. Not strength as power, but strength as presence. Because that kind of masculinity, it isn't outdated, it's just rare. So who was your favourite Bond? And honestly, who would you like to see take up the role? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, please think about liking and subscribing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.